Hey guys, Taki here. 2021 has been a very active year for gaming handhelds, with many compelling options currently on the market. With this latest release, PowKiddy is hoping that a redesigned shell with an aging chipset is enough to draw the attention of shoppers this holiday season. With a sleek new design and improved controls, the Max 2 very well may be the best handheld that PowKiddy has ever made, but it also has some minor flaws and gross oversights that may push people away. The PowKiddy RGB10 Max 2 comes with a nuclear-resistant RK3326 CPU and a Mali G31 GPU. It has 1GB of DDR3L RAM, 32GB of SD card storage, a 4200 mAh battery, a 5-inch IPS display, and support for 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi. Like many of you when this product was originally teased, I hoped that there would be some decent specs to go along with this rather sensible design. PowKiddy is not known for having the best looking designs, and their products usually greenlight a host of questionable design decisions, which is why this device is so interesting. It's so far from other PowKiddy products in a good way that I do not even believe for a moment that the company actually designed this themselves. What we are looking at with the Max 2 is a reshell more than anything else, and in this video, we are going to delve into all of the Nintendo-esque design decisions on display here to see if it's worth the asking price of over $120 US. Starting with the controls, we have a PlayStation controller layout with the D-pad on top of a clickable left analog stick. Near this is our select button, followed by start on the other half with a clickable right analog stick, an LED indicator light, chunky ABXY buttons, and 2 function buttons on the top. While a 16:9 resolution isn't useful on this chip, it does allow you to fill out the screen with some nice bezel art using the default UI. On the top half, we have stacked shoulder buttons in the style of the Switch, power and reset, a Wi-Fi switch, a Type-C charging port, a headphone jack, a Type-C OTG port, an SD card slot, and volume up and down. The back of the shell is held together with 4 screws and features PowKiddy's logo in the center with the product branding. The big star here is the built-in grip, which we will talk about more later. On the bottom of the device, there are 2 speaker grills, but this device only comes with a mono speaker. Here's a brief test of the mic'd up audio quality in the middle of the device on the Max 2 versus the Switch Lite running the same game. Just like the RGB10 Max, the Max 2 uses conductive rubber buttons that are strangely very similar to something that you would find in an Anbernic device. The analog stick is low profile with a full range of movement, and the 2 buttons on the left side are higher this time around, making them easier to use. The ABXY buttons have also been improved, with enough added height that prevents them from bottoming out when they're fully pressed. The right analog stick and the remaining buttons are identical to the left. The Max 2 features a set of redesigned shoulder buttons that are a mixed improvement over the original. The R1 looks similar to the Switch Lite button, but it's harder to press and it's not as fluid. R2, however, is a very nice clone. It is so easy to press and very comfortable. If we look at both devices, you can see just how close the buttons are. R2 on the Switch Lite is just a bit easier to press. The Switch's R1 sits higher than it does on the Max 2, and it also has more bounce to it thanks to an internal spring that pushes it back up after you press. On the Switch Lite, you can see that the button's position over the shell is uniform across the entire range. The good thing about the R1 button on the Switch is that it can register input anywhere you press on the button. The Max 2's R1 button doesn't seem very uniform, and it almost bottoms out when you press it. You also cannot get decent input across the entire range, as the top requires a lot more force to press down. Not having the internal spring to push the button back up causes the button to sit shorter than it should and makes it less enjoyable to use. It's a shame because whoever designed this model did a decent job of copying the R2 button. For many, the new grips are going to be a welcome addition to this redesign. While on the small side, they provide enough grip for your hands to have something to hold on to while gaming. I just wish they were a bit larger because it feels strange to have my ring and pinky finger hanging off the edge. The new case is a huge improvement over the previous product. This black shell is about as matte as you can expect, with a nice texture that provides a small amount of grip for your hands and rejects fingerprints very well. Altogether, the Max 2's controls and redesigned casing provide the best gaming experience that I've had in a PowKiddy product. As I've mentioned at the beginning of this video, this product feels closer to an Anbernic product than anything that PowKiddy has made in the past. The D-pad lends itself very well to fighting games, and the ABXY buttons feel top-notch. The color temperature on the Max 2 is decent, but the maximum screen brightness is not as high as I wish it was. The screen's maximum brightness sits slightly lower than the screen used in the Switch Lite, but remains higher than the screen used in the more powerful X18S. Unfortunately, this screen is still plagued by problems of the first generation, with poorly distributed heat from the IPS LEDs. As you can see with this IR thermometer, the left side of the Max 2 has a very high screen temperature of over 55 Celsius, right near where your thumb will be while you're using it. Whenever I find myself rolling the D-pad, I am always greeted by this very warm area. Depending on how long you use the Max 2 and the types of games that you're playing, it is not uncommon for this area to reach upwards of 60 Celsius. Interestingly enough, some of the heat bleeds through the PCB right to the exact position on the back shell where your fingers will rest. It's important to note that this device does not have a heat shield, so thermals should be a bit higher than they are on other 3326 devices. Before moving on, I want to quickly go over some of the changes between the Max and the Max 2. The first change is the low-profile analog sticks. The underside of the Max 2's analog sticks are almost flush with the front shell in this redesign. On the original device, the analog sticks sit just a bit higher. The ABXY buttons on the Max also sit lower than they do on the Max 2. When you press the buttons on the Max 2, you have a decent amount of space before your finger touches the front shell. If you do the same thing on the Max, the button is almost flush with the front shell. The height of the two function buttons and start and select have also been increased on the Max 2. We also have the change from the inline shoulder buttons to the stacked ones that I've already gone over in depth. The Max 1 uses a rubberized plastic coating that some people tend to hate, but this has been replaced on the Max 2 with normal ABS plastic. Wrapping up with measurements, the ABXY buttons on the original rest about 1.5 millimeters from the front shell, while they are around 2.5 millimeters in the redesign. Center thickness seems to be a tad smaller on the redesign versus the original, but the difference is very minor. This thickness increases when we measure from the side grips. For a chip that's been used for over 2 years now, I did not expect there to be any surprises when it comes to software, but there's one issue that is significant enough to mention. Let's start off by doing a full boot, and we'll talk about the problem when we see it. I think there's an impression that Linux boards boot up instantly compared to Android, and that's not the case. The full boot sequence is around 30 seconds or so on the Max 2. Here we are on our first boot with the default UI. You can see that our systems are shown in a strip style with the number of games listed on the bottom in blue. This console came with a 32GB card filled with ROMs, and most of those ROMs have box art and game snaps that will play inside the ROM system view. It is a nice touch, but you probably need to redo this work for some of the systems with ROMs that you don't want. On this first boot, I was just checking out some of the games that were offered, since this OS doesn't match the one that came with my original device earlier this year when I saw this rather strange addition to the Max 2. I don't know if this kind of thing would have bothered me before I had a child of my own, but I do not understand why the default OS on this device is advertising a porn website on a product from a company with Kitty in their name. This is not even taking into account that this is being marketed on their own website as a children's gift. If I had purchased this for a child without looking at it myself and they saw this, I would be so angry. A decision this devoid of common sense makes it seem like PowKiddy doesn't even QA the software that they copy to use in their products before they sell them. I already notified them of this issue, but do not be surprised if you bought this for your child and it also has this addition. It's a shame because the rest of this default UI is nice. I can't bring myself to do performance tests on this chip anymore after doing so with so many RK3326 handhelds, but I do want to focus on the included bezels because I really enjoy them. For all of the included systems, you will have bezel art on the left and the right depending on the aspect ratio of the game that you are playing. For a few systems, I had to manually change the aspect ratio to fit the bezel that was automatically enabled. Bezels like these are nothing new, but they can be really annoying to configure from scratch. It was cool to have them here by default, and they do a nice job of filling out the black bars on this 16:9 display. Now that we have everything covered on the outside, let's finish up this video with a teardown. With the back shell off, the first thing that you'll notice is this very early build date for this PCB design. This predates the release of the original RGB10 Max. On the back shell, you can see that we still have the same battery. The shell itself is rather thick, which makes it stronger and gives it a more premium feel. Even though this design would make you think otherwise, we still have one speaker inside the Max 2. The speaker is an off-the-shelf component from the cell phone industry with soldered wires to connect it to the PCB. Side by side with the original Max, you can see this redesigned PCB is largely the same, with only some slight changes to the analog stick cabling and the mounted shoulder buttons. With the front shell off, we can answer a few important questions. First, the screen is so hot because they didn't do anything to spread the heat. Typically, this screen would be resting on a magnesium plate that would help spread the heat from the LEDs. As you can see, we don't have anything here except for plastic. At a minimum, they could have used a copper adhesive strip to make things a bit more manageable if they wanted to cheap out on the frame. You can also get a better view of the R1 and L1 buttons and their lack of a spring. It doesn't make sense to do such a good job of cloning the other two shoulder buttons, but fail to follow through on the total package. And finally, here's the D-pad on the Max 2 versus the D-pad used by Anbernic. As you can see, they are almost completely the same. This extends to the rubber contact pads that they both use. There is almost no difference between these. Well, that's the RGB10 Max 2 for you. This is a late launch for an RK3326, and while it may be one of the best versions of that chip that we have ever seen in the last 2 years, it is coming to the market at a really bad time. At over $120, it is pricing itself against the more powerful Retroid Pocket 2 Plus from Retroid and the PowKiddy X18S. In late 2021, we really need companies to stop making RK3326 devices. I would argue that the only way that's going to happen is if people stop buying these devices, but the gears for this device were already in motion before anyone even had a chance to buy the original, so RK3326 may just be the end boss that we can't ever hope to defeat. If you have any questions about the Max 2, feel free to leave those down below and consider leaving a like on this video to support my work. You can also subscribe to the channel to be notified when I make future content. I'll catch you next time with another review. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.